Okay, today is our third day of notes for the Ancient Middle East unit, and today we'll be talking about trading people. So kind of like the conquerors, these people aren't related except in the fact that they are going to become wealthy through trade throughout the Mediterranean world. Before we get started on these different people, let's take a look at the geography of the Middle East. For the most part, the Middle East is a desert, which means it's an arid region with little rainfall. The word arid means dry. It's one of those technical terms that you'll need to know. Arid means dry. The mountain range in the Middle East that we need to know are the Zagros Mountains, which separate Iraq and Iran. For our seas, you need to know the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, and the Black Sea. We've seen those on some of our geography activities. Some of the regions in the Middle East include Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers. What two rivers are we referring to when we talk about Mesopotamia? And you should be thinking the Tigris and Euphrates. If you follow Mesopotamia as it curves in the northern portion of the Middle East and heads towards the Mediterranean Sea, we call that the Fertile Crescent because of its shape, and the land is very arable. We've got Asia Minor. We also call it Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey. That's the land that the Hittites were from. We've got Canaan on the Mediterranean coast. We'll be spending time talking about Canaan today and next class. And we've got modern day Israel, Lebanon, and Palestine there. And the Middle East is made up of countries like Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Jordan. So here we have our map of the Middle East. This is a modern day map. And some of the areas we talked about, we said that this area in Iraq would be Mesopotamia. If you follow it around to the Mediterranean coast, you've got the Fertile Crescent. We'll be spending a lot of time talking about this area today and next class, right on the coast there, as that's where the Hebrews would live, and we'll also talk about the Phoenicians today who live there as well. The first group of trading people that we're going to talk about are the Minoans. And just looking at some of the artifacts we have from the Minoans, what do we think their civilization is like? What are some conclusions that we can come up with about Minoan civilization? Go ahead and take 15, 20 seconds and post in the chat. What do you think the Minoans are like based on these artifacts? Yeah, we should be thinking, okay, they've got vases, pots, so they're storing their food. So that's one thing we can gather. Looking at this vase, we've got a squid or octopus on it. So maybe they live by the sea. And then finally, we've got a bull over here. So bulls are probably important to their society. We know that they've domesticated animals. So just by looking at a few artifacts, we can tell what a civilization might be like. The Minoans were around from 2000 to 1400 BCE, so about 600 years. They were located on the island of Crete, which was close to Greece. Okay, so they live on an island called Crete, which is southeast of the Greek mainland. Their capital city was called Knossos. The K is silent. And their success was based on trade, not conquering other peoples. And they would become a major influence on the early Greeks. And that's the unit we'll be coming to after this one, the Greeks. The Minoan civilization was named after King Minos, who was a part of Greek mythology. He was a king who had supposedly kept a half man, half bull, which is called a minotaur, near his palace. The Minoans would go on to dominate trade in the Mediterranean. They traded pottery, swords, figurines, and precious metals. And they would carry goods from one civilization to another. They didn't have to manufacture all these goods. They were kind of like the middlemen of the trade. And as they crossed the Mediterranean carrying these goods from one civilization to another, they also shared their culture with other groups. So we have cultural diffusion going on. We know quite a bit about the Minoans because their palace at their capital city of Knossos was still intact. And we can look at many of their wall paintings, which we call frescoes, to give us a glimpse of what life was like for them. So a fresco is a special style of art, and as the plaster on the wall dries, you actually paint into that, so it kind of seals the image into the wall, and it lasts for a very long time. Okay, these paintings are over 3,000 years old, and they still look like they're in good shape. So they painted dolphins. Once again, they lived by the sea, so we're going to see different sea life. They created gardens. Some of their paintings depict men and women practicing for athletic contests. And one of their favorite was bull leaping, which we can see right over here. A lot of their paintings included women. So women were a part of Minoan society. We think that women were well respected in their society. And there were no fortifications. They didn't build defensive walls or forts. So they weren't really afraid of invasions, and they had a peaceful society for the most part. So on the left, we've got the Minoan capital of Knossos. We've got the palace and what we think it would have looked like. And on the right, we've got archaeologists excavating this palace. If you're into video games and you ever play Assassin's Creed Odyssey, they do a very good job of recreating the city, and you can kind of wander around it. It's like being able to go back in history and see what it would have looked like in its glory days. So video games aren't completely bad. Here we can see the columns that are holding up the ceiling. We'll talk more about columns when we get to the Greeks. And over here we can see the fresco that is still very vibrant and colorful despite being so old. Once again, a fresco of the dolphins. And we have the sport of bull leaping. Kind of looks like this guy is used to get the bull to charge at him. We've got our leaper, and this person back here looks like they're getting ready to catch them. And we'll watch a quick video because bull leaping hasn't gone away. People still do it. So we'll get the video going in just a second. While we don't know everything about the Minoan religion, we know that they had a great mother goddess, but that they were polytheistic. They sacrificed bulls and other animals to their gods. We know of at least one case of human sacrifice, but we don't think that it was something widespread. The bull played a great role in society and religion. Priestesses led shrines, so the shrines were led by females, and males aided the priestesses. So knowing these things, that they depicted women in their art, they had a great mother goddess who kind of ruled over their religion, and priestesses held the power. We know that women had a higher rank in Minoan society than in neighboring societies. There was more equality between men and women. Minoan civilization will decline circa 1470 BCE. Circa just means around. Okay, we don't know exactly what year, but close to 1470. Why did this happen? We think that volcanic activity on a neighboring island could have caused a tidal wave that really disrupted Minoan life. We also think that they could have been invaded by people from the Greek mainland, and these would have been the Mycenaeans. This was a group of early Greeks who were warlike. And as we know about the Minoans, they weren't really prepared to defend themselves against an invasion. So the Minoan civilization will vanish. The next civilization we're going to talk about are the Phoenicians. Like the Minoans, they traded across the Mediterranean Sea. Here we're looking at one of their ships. They also created artwork. What kind of artwork would we call this? We know it's some sort of sea creature, but we've got all these small tiles that we've kind of glued together. What type of artwork is that? Yeah, we would call that a mosaic. So they also create mosaics for their art style. So the Phoenicians come to power around 1100 BCE. They become the trading power in the Mediterranean, taking over from the Minoans who had vanished a few centuries beforehand. The Phoenicians originated in Lebanon, which is on the Mediterranean coast, and from there would spread out all across the Mediterranean Sea. Their major city-states were Byblos, Tyre, and Sidon. So they didn't have an empire. Instead, they would have independent city-states, like our early Sumerians, and these city-states would compete with each other for power. Each city-state wanted to be the wealthiest and most powerful. The Phoenicians were incredible shipbuilders. They used new iron tools to help them craft ships that could withstand the Mediterranean Sea along with the Atlantic coast. They were the first Mediterranean people to go past the Strait of Gibraltar. And that's where Africa and Spain meet and kind of flows into the Mediterranean Sea. They went past that out towards the Atlantic Ocean. They sailed from the Red Sea around Africa, going past the Cape of Good Hope, and coming back through the Mediterranean Sea. And it would take another 2,000 years before it was done again. So the Phoenicians were well ahead of their time when it came to exploring, and they were a very brave people. So we've got the Phoenician homeland here on the Mediterranean coast. But as the Phoenicians explored the Mediterranean, we can see in this yellow color, they also would create colonies. Okay, we see it across the Mediterranean coast on these islands. They would create colonies where some of their people would stay behind to gather resources, and eventually those colonies, like Carthage, would go on to become their own city-states. Looking at the map on the right, we can see the different city-states like Byblos and Tyre, where the Phoenician homeland would have been. And we can also look and see some of their important trade goods. Timber, we've got pottery, olive oil, and purple dye, which we'll talk about in just a second. So the Phoenicians traveled through the Straits of Gibraltar, right over here, into the Atlantic Ocean. They went around Africa, but they also went north to Britain, where they wanted tin. Why would they want tin? Why is tin important? If you mix tin and copper, you get bronze, which is going to be a worthwhile metal to have, even as we're starting to use iron. Here we have our Phoenician trading ship, and this ship had a very wide bottom, and that way they could store all their goods at the bottom of their ship that they were trying to trade around the Mediterranean. Also notice they were using a square sail. It'll be a little while before we use a better triangular sail. The Phoenicians would trade wine, weapons, and precious metals, along with ivory and slaves throughout the Mediterranean. And much like the Minoans before them, they weren't always the ones creating the goods, but they were the ones trading them as they were the middlemen. One of their most important trade goods was this purple dye, kind of like a maroonish, and it was produced from a snail called the murex. And what they would do is they would take these snails after they've been caught and leave them out in the sun. The snails would kind of rot, and as they did so, they would produce a dye, and you would squeeze that dye out of the snail. And it took 60,000 of these dead snails to produce just 1 pound of dye. So it was going to be very expensive due to the time it took to create the dye. When we think of the color purple, we think of the robes that a Roman emperor might wear, or a king in the Middle Ages. Okay, this purple color was very difficult to get, it was rare, and therefore it becomes the sign of royalty. They were also known for their cedar wood. The cedar had a very nice aroma, and people would make boxes to store things in, like their clothing. And the cedar would also help to keep bugs away from eating your clothing, like moths. Along with purple dye, the Phoenicians were also known for the alphabet. They developed the first phonetic alphabet, phonetic coming from the word Phoenician. And this meant that every symbol made a sound. So this is different than the pictograms we had seen in earlier civilizations. Instead of each letter standing for an idea, it stands for a sound. And we can put these sounds together to make words or ideas. It makes life a lot easier. We have 26 letters in our alphabet. When we want to make up a new word, we put those letters together to form the word. We don't have to create a new symbol every time we see something new. And that was important for the Phoenicians because they sailed around the Mediterranean exploring, learning about new civilizations. Instead of making a new symbol for something that they saw for the first time, they took the symbols they already had to create a new word. Eventually, this alphabet would be modified by the Greeks and the Romans, and it's going to look a lot like our alphabet by the time the Romans get to it. So it made record keeping much easier while trading. So we have the original Phoenician alphabet in the middle, and we can follow it up, and we've got the Greek alphabet, then the Latin alphabet, and eventually ours, which was a form of the modern Roman alphabet. Okay, and you can see that some of these ideas look quite a bit alike what we use. We've got the T over here, and if we follow it up, we see how it kind of stays consistent. Okay, H, though, looked a lot different when the Phoenicians were using it, and we can see how it changed over time into our modern day H. It also went in a different direction towards the Middle East, where the Phoenician alphabet would become the basis for early Aramaic, and eventually following that line, it would become Arabic. The Phoenicians would decline when their eastern cities were captured by the Assyrians in 842 BCE. With the Assyrians in charge, it hurt trade. And the western colonies, which would eventually become their own city-states, like Carthage, would grow and become powerful. Carthage would eventually become an enemy of the Romans. We'll get to that much later. The Phoenician homeland was finally taken over by the Persians under Cyrus the Great, and that would really spell the end of their empire, their trading empire. We have two other groups of traders. We don't need to know as much about them as we do the Minoans and Phoenicians. We have the Aramaeans who settled in Syria and Mesopotamia. They had a monarchy as their system of government. That means they had one ruler, a king or queen. Unlike the Minoans and Phoenicians, the Aramaeans were land traders and moved together using a caravan. And a caravan is when you have a group of people traveling together for protection. Okay, there's safety in numbers. When I think of a caravan, I think of the Dodge Caravan, where you could fit like 7 or 8 passengers in this automobile. The Aramaeans would control the trade routes between Egypt and Mesopotamia, and their language of Aramaic would become the common language of this region. Aramaic was a combination of Hebrew and Arabic, and this language would spread throughout the Middle East. So once again, we're seeing cultural diffusion. Here we have a fairly recent photograph of a trading caravan from this region. Of course, they're using camels instead of cars or trucks. Remember, camels who have one hump, they are from west of the Himalayan mountains. 2-hump camels, though, come from the eastern side of the Himalayas, the areas that are going to be colder. Finally, we have the Lydians. Their civilization was located in modern-day Turkey, which we also call Asia Minor or Anatolia. And it is a peninsula surrounded by the Black Sea, the Aegean Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea. The Lydians became the cultural center of Asia Minor, and they invented money and set prices. Now we say invented money. They did this independent of the Chinese during the Zhou dynasty. The Zhou dynasty was the first to make money, but the Lydians do this on their own as well. They also set prices, meaning that no matter where you go in one of their cities, you're going to pay the same price for, let's say, bread or a sword. It's going to cost the same amount, which isn't very good for the consumer. Most of the neighbors of the Lydians were still using the barter system, and that's a system where we trade one good for another good. So the Lydians had a more advanced economic system, and the Persians, as they were going around conquering territory, would see that the Lydians were using money, and they would take this money system from the Lydians and use it in their own empire. Okay, so that's what we have for our third day of notes. We will cover the Hebrews next class.